Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter podcast. I am your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I am on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship is conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter podcast. I'm recording today with Brian Lynn of the Sportsmen's Alliance once again, and I was reading a magazine edition of Sportsmen's Alliance that came out, and it was in there's an article written about The Price is Wrong and how there's a lot of Hollywood celebrities and some really big money people in this nation that are investing into animal rights lawyers and to help see judges so that if they're losing the battle on legislation side, that they're going to be able to win it in the courtroom side. So I invited Brian on to go ahead and talk about that. And so, Brian, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. Great article, super informative, and something that everyone needs to be aware of. So just lay it out for everyone what your article is about and what's going on in this world.
Yeah, so this was something, I had heard about Bob Barker giving $1 million endowment to his school or to some school, law school, several years ago. And like, okay, great, whatever. And then I started, I don't know what it was, something spurred me to start looking into it and researched it. And then it turned out it wasn't just $1 million. He's given 10 $1 million grants, or actually 8, and then one $2 million grant to his undergrad school. But he's given out $10 million to law schools nationwide in an effort to specifically fund sustained tracks of animal rights law, so that there will always be classes and tracks and talking about theory, philosophy, tort, family law, everything that has to do with regular law, will be covered with animal rights law and within there. And we're talking like Harvard, UCLA, Stanford, Columbia, and Georgetown, like Ivy League schools that are turning out these lawyers that have been trained in the philosophy of animal rights. And his main point was, we need more laws. We need to enforce the laws we have. If this gets, people talking about it and working to do that, that's better for the animals. And lawyers then often go on to become judges who are then making decisions. And if they're predisposed to the animal rights law and philosophies, they're more likely to rule in the favor of animal rights. And they also go on to become legislators so that they can then create more laws easier and pass them. And so he's taking this long approach. We see animal rights moving short term with big flare-ups, cease of the line and whatever, and you see knee-jerk legislation. You see that kind of medium play with the lawsuits that drag out for 10 years. This is looking 10, 20, 30 years down the road that the animal rights movement is working, and there's big money behind it, and it's already setting the stage and seating the bench and legislatures with people who are prone to be pro animal rights.
Man, it's so crazy. With today, you hear Trump always talking about draining the swamp and trying to remove the crooked politicians and the crooked judges and all these people of power. And yet here is Bob Barker, which I'm surprised he's still alive. I feel like he was in his 90s when I was watching him as a kid. But here he is donating money to support animal rights. Now, let all the listeners be clear. We are anti-animal abuse. We are all for animals, but when it comes to under the umbrella of animal rights, we're talking that it is really anti-hunting legislation and laws and rules that get put in place through these animal rights activists and organizations, and then eventually the lawyers and the judges and all that. So, Bri, there is on your map that you put on the article, one university was actually from the state of Washington that looked like it was getting animal rights lawyers pumping out. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it looks like Western Washington. It looks like Western Washington University is probably up there, or yeah, not positive, but it looks like it's in Bellingham there, so which
Man,
wouldn't be a big surprise.
right. Well,
Um,
it's a good thing I chose Central then.
yeah, and I was at Eastern, so
I love it.
um, actually, the kind of the epicenter for all of this is Lewis and Clark College in Portland. There, that's kind of like their think tank. They're the leaders. Go figure, Portland, behind all this, and they're kind of that. They're the Ivy League school of this train of thought. But then the other schools, are have that cachet and literally Ivy League.
Yeah.
And when this all started with his 30th anniversary, um, as the host of The Price is Right, the production company gave $500,000 to Harvard in his name for animal rights law study. And then he thought, well, that's a great idea. And at that time, there was only like 9 schools who kind of dabbled in animal rights law.
Hmm.
And then Bob started giving out $1 million endowments with the specific outline of you have to have sustainable tracks. There has to be consistent classes offered in this. And, it might be every other year, but in the off year, you have to host a symposium or mock trials or whatever for everybody else dealing with this stuff. And so he gave out these, $1 million grants and gave another $500,000 to Harvard to keep doing this. Now, from nine schools, a decade or so later, 15 years later, there's 167 schools in the US and Canada that offer animal rights law classes and tracks.
And it's becoming more and more mainstream and popular, which is scary to think about when we want to continue our hunting and trapping and fishing rights for generations to come.
Oh, most definitely, and we see it right now. I mean, we're fighting lawsuits. We just won the one, and we're in 3 others. But that's where this ultimately ends up going, is to courts, and then they set the precedent, and that carries forward. And a lot of times it's not even based on whether or not something is legal or if there's enough of a population. It's founded on precedent and earlier court rulings, or completely unrelated court rulings, but the same legal precedent and idea.
Hmm.
And so it can compound very quickly and create problems for us.
Gotcha. Gotcha. See, and so this is really interesting to see, like, where are the lawyers that are pro hunting? Where are the judges that are pro hunting? How are we going to be able to protect and fight for what we love? Yeah, it seems like we always have to counteract everything that the antis are doing. And dude, constant battle. And I'm thankful for Sportsmen's Alliance for being on the forefront of this.
Yeah, no, it is. It's tough, and we are kind of in that reactionary position just because things are open and legal and they can pick and choose what they want to try to destroy or go after. And they can plan it, they can put everything in place, and we have to react really quickly and come up with the argument and the counter arguments and, the way to diffuse it or to get a legislator not to, follow through with it. And eventually it comes down to money, it comes down to time, and they are very well funded and can, pay
Yeah.
lobbyists well and pay a lot of lobbyists. They can pay lawyers, and they can drag out these cases, knowing that sportsmen don't have as much money, and knowing that while the cases in court, such as the wolves in the Great Lakes or the grizzly bear in the Yellowstone ecosystem, that hunting doesn't take place.
Right.
So if they can wrap it up for 10, 15, 20 years, even if ultimately they lose, they stopped it for 20 years and they did 20 years of fundraising on the backs of those animals.
Mm. Yeah, it was really interesting reading the article and knowing that there's a ship named after Bob Barker, and
Yeah.
the anti-whaling ship. And the whole idea of, like, people are like, oh, how could you fish for whales? But if you think of it like from a big picture, like, okay, here's a ship that is like anti-whaling. Okay, I don't know enough about whaling to like be pro or against it or whatever, but when you read into it in your article, you talked about how they are actually almost like a terrorist group where it's like they're trying to sink ships or plant mines or chemical
Yeah.
warfare. Like, tell us more about that.
Yeah. So the Sea Shepherd Society, Conservation Society, I guess is what they're called. The guy was a former founder of Greenpeace, and he was kicked out of Greenpeace because he was too radical. And so he, created this Sea Shepherd Conservation Society. And don't ask me how, but the dude like has a show on Animal Planet. But they engage in terrorist like activities. They go after these whaling ships, and yeah, they've planted mines, they've thrown chemicals, basically like Molotov cocktails onto the decks of the other one of whaling ships. They've rammed them. um, Interpol has flagged them. U.S. courts have, told them to stay away and stay out of these waters. They don't fly under the U.S. flag or any other flag except Netherlands. They're the only ones that would allow them to do it, which that's a whole another can of worms there. So that's, they're basically pirates that have one country that will allow them to do this. Somehow the guy has a show, but Bob Barker gave him $5 million to outfit this ship that they can go after the whaling fleets, out in the Pacific or wherever, North Atlantic.
It
Um,
it's so interesting. You look at I being not a hunter or being raised in a hunting household. I always watched The Price is Right. I remember going over to my grandparents' house and I remember Bob Barker at the end of the shows, "Hey, don't forget to spay and neuter your pets." I was like, "Oh, the guy obviously wants to make sure that cat and dog populations stay lower, especially if they're, wild or running rampant in neighborhoods or whatever." So I was like, "Oh, that's cool." But you don't realize the snake oil that comes with it or how these celebrities and mainstream popular wealthy people slip in the darkness and start actually fighting against a lot of the things that America stands for and loves.
Yeah, and that's where you go from that animal welfare of spay and neuter, which okay, I don't think anybody's really against that, as far as yeah, let's keep, stray pet populations and feral cat populations and all this under control. I don't think really anybody has a problem with that. But then when you look at the other things he's funded, we talked about the conservation or a Sea Shepherd, basically terrorists, and then he's given money to PETA to fund their West Coast headquarters in West Hollywood, which handles their youth outreach, which is crazy. If you ever want to look at something, go to PETA 2, their that website, and they have forums on there aimed at high school kids and down. And I mean, it's talking
Man,
about how to rebel against your parents and
it's
what
pure
to do if you want to
indoctrination.
be a vegetarian. It's completely indoctrination.
It's
And they start it at middle school and high school and pull them into this philosophy. And then, of course, a lot of times kids go off to college, they become a little more liberal, anyways, they're on their own. And they get further and further into it. And then, they have stars who are influential, Pink and Joaquin Phoenix and Alec Baldwin and all these people that they see, at the Emmys or whatever, talking about, animal rights and blah, blah, blah. And then they can get a law degree that has a tract in animal rights, and then they can be these heroes or something, I don't know. um but yeah, there's a lot of people and stars out there with a lot of money who are funding PETA and RSPCA and the Humane Society of the United States. I'm talking tens and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah. And it's so interesting going back to the whole draining the swamp and the concept of people giving platforms to celebrities like they are the end all be all.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. And I don't know if anyone gets into like conspiracy theories or anything like that, but the whole concept of like the deep state and how Hollywood portrays all of that, and it's all um, CIA based, like mind control. It's really interesting because it seems like if you are in a Hollywood, you are a bleeding heart liberal, anti guns, anti hunting, everything, that indoctrination. And kids nowadays, they get it through social media, they're getting it through the TV and everything. And it's like, if you don't believe like them, then you're wrong, you know? And not to make this about like Black Lives Matter or whatnot, but I see like the indoctrination of different things happening in America, where I actually went down to the Black Lives Matter uh, march here in my local town, and I was watching all these people march by, and I was like, dude, most of these are high school students, middle school students, younger age kids, and not to speak up against Black Lives Matter or anything like that, but just the whole idea is that you see this indoctrination happening at young ages, and this goes to exactly what you're saying with PETA targeting middle school age and high school age, and you know, it's not just animal rights activists targeting our youth in America, and got to make sure you parent your children. You got to make sure that you uh, spend time with your family and really invest into their lives and make sure that you have conversations that are tough to have, because that is what's going to make you better as an individual, you better as a family, and us better as Americans.
Yeah, I mean, political discourse is great. Political activism, great. Whether you're for or against it, that's the system at work. What we've run into now is we live in an era of outrage.
Right.
Everybody's outraged about something, and political correctness. And if you don't say it right, words get weaponized, and then there's blame. And if you don't agree with it, you are shamed, bullied, or threatened, or just shut down. You're canceled out. Called the cancel culture, where you're just canceled out and you're silenced.
Yeah.
And anytime you can hold up children in the media or whatever, that gets clicks. We live in a clickbait society, soundbite society, where you can say something and it sounds reasonable, or it sounds great, or it sounds honorable, but when you do the digging and you start asking hard questions, whether it's the Black Lives Matters movement or animal rights and what happens afterwards, these things aren't simple cut and paste and frankly black and white. There's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of discussion points, there's a lot of culture and subcultures and precedent of law and everything else that goes into it that makes it very hard and convoluted. And it's not that easy when you start getting into the nuts and bolts of things, of how it works and maintaining law in accordance with freedoms.
Totally agree.
So it's not that easy, but the outrage and the headline grabbing is what works.
Well, it's so interesting. And let me just say this real quick in case anyone misunderstood me. I love all people, and I want everyone to enjoy hunting. I do see, as a school teacher, um, mainstream media has a huge impact on these children's lives, and they're not very open to different ideas. Especially being a pro hunting school teacher, it's really hard when I teach archery in my classes and I want to talk about, hey, you can do this as a skill set and a lifetime skill, work on focus, your zen, all that stuff. But if I was to say, hey, you could go harvest your own meat, all of a sudden, I'd have kids in an uproar against me, and it's like, oh, dude, you guys take a step back. Take a step back, evaluate your life, think for yourself. What drives me nuts, and I actually talk about this to my wife a lot, is everyone has Siri or Alexa or some type of electronic thing that we ask for information, like, hey, what's the weather going to be like today? Oh, the weather's going to be blah, 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 blah. Well, the issue is that no one has their own information for themselves. They rely upon someone else holding the knowledge. And so
Yep.
the issue is that knowledge being told to you, who's actually checking it to see if it's accurate or correct or truthful. So, if all of a sudden Google turns sideways or Amazon turns sideways and is like pushing out anti-hunting rhetoric, people would not think twice about it because, oh, Alexa said it was this. And so there you go.
Yep. And then they don't bother to fact check it. They don't bother. They just think, oh, well, they wouldn't do that if it wasn't true.
Right.
So there's social engineering that's taking place. And the animal rights movement is very good at it. They've been doing it now for decades.
Yeah.
Whether it's indoctrination about, how what hunting does is cruel, and how we can all live, like in a Disney movie, and Bambi and Thumper and
Right.
everybody lives together, and Pumbaa and the, Cecil the lion, or not, whoever the Lion King was, they all lay down
That's
together and
yeah.
eat grub worms and stuff. Like they create this, and then they start activating them with the outrage and the media, and how to defy your parents, or how to hold a protest. They'll send a kit with stickers and how to hold a protest information, and then they get them to feel like they belong. Meanwhile, they're also working the court system and the legislature to create those laws, and they activate the kids and college students and the adults who are like-minded, and those voting blocks in the cities who don't have to deal with the consequences and repercussions of an ignorant vote that doesn't know what's going on in the countryside. They don't care. They can appeal to them from this riotous standpoint of, this is wrong and we need to fight this and do this. And they can also do it very eloquently with lawyers and lobbyists in legislatures and in the court system.
Yeah.
And it's coming together. It's, two ends, I think I say it in the article. They've been burning both ends of a social engineering candle for, decades now.
Yeah.
And you see it when they reap rewards and when they stall things and stop hunting with by court order.
I give them credit. It's genius. They are literally playing the long game in game theory of like, okay,
Yeah.
counter move to that counter move.
And they always get to move first.
Right.
They get to dictate the game and the playing field that we're on at all times. They can plan it and move it and set precedent and whatever else they want to do. We're playing blindfolded with fewer pieces and not nearly as much money.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, well, listen, everyone, I hope you have really enjoyed this conversation. If you have not signed up to be a member of Sportsmen's Alliance yet, go do it. It is a completely different organization than any other conservation group. They want to fight for you. They're not a chapter-based organization. So when you join, your money stays in-house. You're not having to do a bunch of different fundraisers or, pay for a membership for your local chapter and national chapter and all that. And so really appreciate it. I appreciate, Brian, what you do for hunting, trapping, and fishing and everything that's going on in America. And man, I can't wait to have you on. Anytime you have some pressing news in the hunting world, let's get you on here. Let's give you a microphone to share the news, because here's the thing, you're not going to get this on mainstream media. It is going to be through word of mouth and podcasts and sharing this episode and sharing this podcast and spreading the word this way, because knowledge is power, and the more knowledge you have, the more informed decisions you can make, and the more that you can impact lives, because remember, hunting has the power to transform lives through primal adventure. So, Brian, dude, thank you. Is there anything else you want to add to this episode?
Well, if we're talking about things that are pressing and just happened, our ruling that one of our lawsuits, our federal lawsuits, the Trump administration took our recommendation and made rule changes up in Alaska. And this is a perfect example of what we're talking about right here as far as outrage culture that we're seeing today. You'll see the headlines probably right now that are saying, Trump administration okays clubbing grizzly bears, cubs, and in their den while they sleep, and gassing wolf pups, killing swimming caribou, rolling back these protections for wildlife. Is completely out of context, not real, not true. The rule changes restored the rights of Alaska, of citizens, and of native communities. These rules have been around for 40, 50 years since the Reagan administration, and it deals with subsistence hunting of natives. Going in hunting grizzly bears in the den is a source of food for these native communities above the Arctic Circle in one little spot in Alaska, and it's a traditional method of harvest. They repealed that. They took away the biologists' ability to go into areas that are having too many predators and tipping the balance of the scale away from ungulates, caribou herds, because too many grizzly bears, black bears, and wolves in the area where they can do controlled predator hunts themselves. It had nothing to do with sport hunters, but that's what it sounds like when you see it in the media right now. It sounds like, all the white dudes who are hunting are going up to Alaska and clubbing things while they sleep or gassing them. And it had nothing to do with sport hunting.
I
It was
actually
indigenous rights and biologists under very specific circumstances during very specific times, during very specific areas.
That is crazy.
Completely taken out of context.
I actually did hear about this, and I was like, I don't know any hunter that would actually go and kill something in its den or all this different stuff. Like the fair chase concept.
Yeah.
I was like, usually that's just against hunting rules and regulations, anyways. So for them to like take that away, or I don't, dude, I can totally see how mainstream media spins things.
Yeah, it was completely spun, and we have a feature on it. It'll be out in the next magazine. It's online right now. But we talk about how these are indigenous rights, and they were very clever with it, and they framed it very cleverly. The last administration did as they were doing this, and it pretty much encapsulated any kind of predator management. It was also an overreach by the federal government.
Gotcha.
Even though these are federal lands within the state of Alaska, the state controls the fish and game, right?
Yeah.
They get to set the season dates. They get to set the bag limits. They get to set the methods and means. Whether you use bait or whether you use hounds or whatever, they get to control that. The feds do not control any of that except for the Endangered Species Act and the Migratory Waterfowl Act. That's it. That's all they do. There is no national deer season that you can travel to whatever state and hunt on the same tag. That just doesn't exist. The states manage these federal lands, the fishing game on these federal lands. This was a grab by the feds, which then would politicize wildlife management. Whoever was sitting in the Oval Office could then be changing it every time, which then becomes a political pawn employ and politicizes wildlife. On top of that, it would have set precedent. Alaska, it has 3 different compacts, including their Statehood Act, their Constitution, the National Wildlife Reformation Act of 1997, and I believe there's another one that says, Alaska, we get to manage the fish and game in accordance to our traditions and yada, yada, yada. And we're talking about millions of acres. We're talking enough public land, federal public land, that it was the size of Montana. And if they could do that with that many legal precedents in place in Alaska, slip it under the radar, they could do that throughout the West and throughout the rest of the country, saying, well, we have precedent doing it here in Alaska. It's gone fine. We're in control. We get to dictate this. And then they could shut down or challenge or change anything based on their federal ownership of the land, not the fish and the game.
Man, crazy. Well, here you go, ladies and gentlemen. It is time to be vigilant for what you love. You love hunting, you love fishing, you love the outdoors. It is not enough just to be a participant in that activity anymore in today's age. It is time for everyone to share their voice, to share their insight and their passion, and to stand up for what you love. You love hunting, you love fishing, you love trapping, then let's get united, let's take a stand, and let's keep it going for generations to come. Brian, thank you so much for being on here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Heck yeah. Well, hey, all of us got to stay together because we know how much hunting and fishing, trapping, the outdoors can impact our lives. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that mentorship is conservation, and hunting has the power to transform your life through primal adventure. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to go subscribe, like, comment, rate this podcast, and as always, ladies and gentlemen, stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com. And be sure to follow the podcast, as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.